Hi sewers, I'm Carrie and this is So Darn Fun, a channel that focuses on quality clothing alterations, pattern reviews, and useful sewing how-tos. Today we're going to take a look at a couple different lesser known methods, I think, of making bias tape. I was reading a couple 37-year-old sewing magazines and discovered that there's another way of making bias tape than I've been doing for the last eon or two. So set aside your notion of drawing a line on the bias and using your scissors, or even the maybe more common method of using your quilter straight edge and your rotary cutter. So maybe I'm just late to the party, which isn't a big surprise there. But to me, these were new ideas. So I haven't tried them yet. Let's check them out together and see which one might work best for different projects. So first of all, I'm starting off with two identical squares. I've decided to use this lovely silk left over from another project that I have because I thought that I might want to use a bias binding or something made with a nice silk. So they're both exactly square. I'm going to set one aside, but you can see that I have measured and I have made them exactly square. So if I fold it in half like this, the point matches up, the corners match up here. Okay, let's turn it this way. And the first method, we're going to use the ironing board. Now this might be difficult if you were using like 36 inches, a big yardage, but right now we're just going to do separate bias strips that are of a smaller length, and we're going to first fold it in half like this and continue over on the ironing board. So let's go over there and finish this step. I don't know how this method would work if you were using a fabric that didn't hold a crease. But then again, if it didn't hold a crease, you might not want to make bias from it. So something to think about there. Now the directions say to fold this bottom edge up. It doesn't say how much, so let's just make it like, I think a good one is maybe 1.25 inches. I'm going to pin it there to make sure that those layers don't move. So now we're going to fold that up the same amount. So I can feel that that is turned under. I wonder if I can just keep doing it like this. It might need to be pinned, but let's try to do it this way without. Because the whole idea here, I think, would be to try to get bias strips quickly, not more laborsomely, right? Can we get one more in there? Yeah, let's do that and then we'll stop. Okay, let that cool off. Now the whole idea here is that we draw lines. I'm first going to just make sure I've got a perpendicular line up through the point here, up through the very middle of my strip. So from end to end it's going to be exactly in the middle. So I've got a pen here that disappears with heat. That's why I wanted this cooled off. Hopefully this line will stay on here. All right, and because I think I want to make my bias strips 2 inches wide, that way I can fold them and make some nice double fold bias strips later on. And because that's exactly in the middle, I'll need to draw 1 inch to the right of it and 1 inch to the left of it. And certainly you could use a rotary cutter. I was trying to avoid using that for this demo. So it's 2 inches between this line and this line. So now I can go 2 inches all the way down, making sure that the bottom of my strip is some line on my straight edge and as well as the line I've already drawn vertically. So all the way down. We can fast forward this and then see what to do next. Okay, all those lines are drawn, and now what we do is we take our scissors or your rotary cutter and we cut on those lines straight up, and then we'll see what we end up with. I'm at a bad angle, so I'm going to move it this way, and that way I can cut beside the camera here so I don't have to reach around. There we go. Much better. Okay, let's unroll these and see what we've turned out. Oh, it looks like a tie. Cute. Okay. Wow. Is this quicker than using just a rotary cutter and a straight edge? I don't know. It's kind of a cool idea. We have all these pieces here that if we want a longer piece, we would have to sew them together. They seem to be pretty straight, but let me iron them and see if they're actually straight or if they're kind of wiggly. I know when I use a rotary cutter to get my bias strips, sometimes I kind of get off bias somehow, just a little bit, or my strips are a little wiggly because the fabric doesn't stay nice and straight. It kind of swirls around a little bit. Static electricity. Okay, I can see that these are not completely straight. Static electricity. Can you see? Harder to see on camera, but I can see that this edge here kind of bows in and bows out. This would not ruin a bias strip, but it's not perfectly straight. Seems like this edge is straight, but this one kind of goes out, in, and that would be because it wasn't folded exactly, or my cuts weren't exact, but that's going to be the issue. You can definitely see right here how that's kind of wonky. And then if you wanted a longer strip, then you sew this diagonal edge here to that edge there by doing them right sides together in this fashion. Like this. And this corner will stick out a little bit over here depending on what your seam allowances are. Okay, so this was kind of Let's go to the other method and see what we are to do. Number 2 here is for a continuous bias strip. So I'm going to start with the same exact square that I had before, and I am going to need to designate this bias right here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this to the ironing board and just get a press crease in there, and then I'll be right back. Right there. Why did I do that? Because I'm going to cut it. It's just a good way to mark a line without using a pen that kind of sometimes drags and pulls the fabric. So let's go ahead and cut that right there. Okay, now these stripes are going to be helpful to us because this stripe runs along the straight of grain. And we want to keep that in mind, the straight of grain. So here's the straight of grain at the bottom. Here's the straight of grain at the top. And what I want to do is put those two together right now. So I'm going to move this one down and move this one up here. See, this is a funny shape I have now. It's kind of a lopsided diamond. Squished out diamond. Let me get a farther away view so you can see it. Okay, so this is what we had, but this is how we want to position it, like this. So we've got the two straight edges together. And we're going to want to turn those right sides together and sew a seam along that edge. So I'm going to take that to the machine and sew it. I'm going to press the seam open, then I'll be right back. This is our piece. We've got our pressed seam right here. I've got the raw edges on the bottom and the finished seam on the top. Now here's the tricky part. You want to take this top piece, this one that's got the edge that goes pretty much straight up. So it's the one that's perpendicular to your seam that's on the grain, and you are going to twist it over like that. And the bottom, you're going to do the opposite and twist it over this way. These two seams will be sewn together. Now, we are going to sew them so that the raw edges come like this. That way, your finished seam is on the inside, just like this previous one here. So the raw edges are here, The raw edges are here. So just keep that in mind. If you have a print that's the right side, wrong side, it's easier to tell by stripes here are a little bit lighter on one side, a little bit darker on the other. So here is what you need to keep in mind. Now I want to make 2-inch bias strips, just like I did with that previous bias. So what I want to do is on this edge here, I want to mark 2 inches from the end. I'm going to put a pin there so I remember it. 2 inches. Now I want to align that with the seam line right there. So when I pin this on for sewing, this is going to stick out 2 inches beyond that edge of my previous sewing. There's the seam. It's hard to tell with all the stripes, but let me lift up the seam allowances. Can you see? There's the seam allowances folded flat. I am putting this seam, I'm putting the pin on it right there so that I can pin this edge together. So I'm going to pin this, and I'm going to continue pinning it all the way till I run out of fabric. So I haven't done this before, so you and I are doing it here for the first time together. We'll see how it turns out. Okay, now I'm coming to the other end already. And keep in mind this is a continuous bias strip. I'm expecting this to be pretty cool. We'll see.
Get used to disappointment.
Okay, here's my other seam right here. So I know that's going to be the end of where I'm going to sew, and this edge here should poke out 2 inches beyond this seam and this seam right here. So interestingly enough, after I have this all pressed, I measured these ends that I have out, because remember I wanted 2 inches of bias strip. Let's measure from this side so that you can see right where I started sewing to the tip of this piece. It's actually generous. It's actually a little bit more than 2 inches. But when I come here to make the markings for cutting, if I measure 2 inches, it's way over here, an inch from where I had my point at. I don't know how you're supposed to figure that out mathematically. In the magazine, which I am following, to make a 2-inch wide strip, extend the tip of B. They've done a bunch of labeling all these corners and sides, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Extend it so that there's a 2-inch extension of fabric beyond the seam on that side, which is what I did. Now I realize this was a home sewing magazine from 37 years ago, and before publishing it, they might not have really tried to test this out. But this doesn't work. I think this idea probably will work in general, but the measurement is incorrect. I would need to set my tip 3 inches beyond where I met this seam in order to get a 2-inch strip. So keep that in mind if you ever try this. So what I'm going to do is I am going to draw 2 inches all the way through. Oops. All for the sake of getting one long bias strip. This might be useful if you're doing upholstery or sometimes some of these old anecdotal things don't really quite match up to what they claim to be. I need to somehow make this line that I got here match up with my original, which means that this end of the strip isn't going to be right with. I thought this was going to be really, really great and really cool, but so far, been a little bit disappointing. I'm not really sure how to make that line up. This is totally thrown off. Let me think about this for a minute and come up with a solution here. So after spending a considerable amount of time thinking and rethinking what that magazine said to do in order to get these continuous bias strips, I racked my brain to think how we can make this work. So I've put something together, and this is how we're going to do it, which is going to give us a much better result. We're going to start here. So rewind almost everything I taught you about this method, except for when you sew these two pieces together. So we're going to start from this part. We've got the straight of grain here. This is the bias. This is the bias, obviously. So we're going to start over here on this corner, and we're going to go ahead and mark our 2 inches from this edge, because remember 2 inches is what I wanted my bias strip to be. And I'm just going to use a pencil because these lines are going to be cut on anyway. They're not ever going to show. And we're just going to mark all this. And then 2 inches in from that line. And depending on how wide you make your strips, once you finally make your way over to the right side here, it might not be exactly the width that you want. There might be a little bit extra. That's okay. I'll just make these 2 inches as far as I can go. That's why I like laying it on this quilter's mat, because I can see the grid and I can line up the lines of my piece that I know are on the straight grain. And my last piece, wow, that is 2 inches. How about that? Now, this is something that I actually think is useful. It's an extra step that I want to take here, is I want to draw in my seam allowance. Because what I want to do is I want to make an intersection between the lines I just drew and what my seam allowance is going to be, and that'll make sense here in just a minute. So mine are going to be 3/8. So let's go ahead and draw that on there. We especially want it on the intersection of these diagonal lines. This end and this one down here. All right, now this is the really important part. Remember, we fold this way and this way. Now what we have here that we didn't have before are these markings here. This seam line right here, you can, my pencil didn't quite make it over, but we know where that's going to be at right there, is going to meet with the intersection of where I drew here. I was a little messy here, so ignore that line up there, but right there. So what I want to do is I'm going to take a pin, and I'm going to pin it through the intersection here, and then through the seam line right there. And as I line up these edges here, then I can bring the pin back through to hold it secure. So I want to do this all the way down through every line. So here's right there. There's the intersection. And there's the intersection right there. Those are going to exactly line up when we sew this seam. There. Now I am going to sew that seam with a 3/8 inch. Then I'm going to press this open and we'll see what it looks like. Here's the seam I just sewed. I've pressed it open, and let's take a look at those marks on the other side. I want to see them line up like this because that's where I want to be cutting. Oh, so much nicer. So much nicer than what we did before. So let's grab our scissors and cut along that line. So we're going to start here and just start cutting. Would you look at that? Look at that. Beautiful continuous bias. Wow. Hey, I think that works. Ignore the magazine. Follow this method here. Nice. So I'm back for a quick recap on what I just learned. So let's go over what we did real quick and then what I think might be the pros and cons. So method number 1 was this fold, 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 cut method. Remember that? Yes, you can get bias strips. Remember, the edges were wobbly. You'll get one long strip and all the other ones are graduated to a smaller length. Remember all these crookedy little strips? They're not bad, but maybe messy to deal with. I just don't see how with cloth it's going to be the best method to go to get some good bias strips. Method number 2, that's the one I got out of a magazine.
I followed their directions, and as you saw in the video, the methodology is flawed. The method is good, so it can work, but what was in here, we're gonna throw that away. That didn't work at all. So when you follow the method that I ended up showing, that works spectacularly. You can see here that I have a very usable straight bias, and it's exactly the width I wanted it. On this side, you've got just the bias strips. I have not folded them and pressed them, and then on this side, I actually made bias tape, a double fold bias tape. I loved that method. Once we got down exactly how to get the thickness of strips we wanted, I would say for me, that one would be the one that I would go to if I wanted a long continuous bias. So there you go. Method 1, and probably throw it out. Method 2, don't follow the magazine directions, but follow what I ended up coming up with. That methodology will work. I hope that today's video was something that gave you some information that you can take and use. Please watch my other videos. I hope to see you again in the near future. Don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell. I hope you have a great day and keep on sewing.